Well, after years of waiting and waiting, the Crash Bandicoot Sane Trilogy is now out and available to play. But does it live to the hype, and is it a proper homage to the classic PS1 platforming trilogy? Well, let's find out in my review for Crash Bandicoot The Sane Trilogy. Now, I know that I haven't talked much about the Crash Bandicoot series on my channel for quite some time now. I'm just gonna say right now that I am a big fan of the Crash Bandicoot series. And when I first learned that we were getting a new Crash Bandicoot game, and not only that, but a full-on remake from the ground up that was going to pay tribute to the original game trilogy, I lost my shit in the best way possible. From the moment of E3's 2016 Sony press conference where we heard that familiar iconic Crash Bandicoot tune, followed up with the grand announcement that the Crash Bandicoot Sane Trilogy was a real thing that was going to happen, while I was a bit skeptical, I was still very much excited. I have to say that waiting for this game to finally release was a big trial of patience because as the game was getting closer to the release date, it was being spoiled left, right, and center. I tried my best not to spoil myself with this game, as I genuinely want to be surprised with it. And while I mostly succeeded, I was unfortunately spoiled by the reveal of Coco being playable, because of the spoiler being written right in the freaking title on the sidebar of suggested videos. Anyway, the game finally came out, and needless to say, I am pretty keen to get into this game. Now, in order for a video game remake to be successful, it has to be just as good and perhaps even a tad better than the original games they're based off of. If a remake fails to do just that, then it'll be nothing more than a waste of time. So here's how I'm gonna do this review. I'm going to be judging the three games individually and how they stack up to the original games they're based off of. My rating will be based off of the presentation, the gameplay, the music, and the overall lasting impression the remakes left, and if they manage to live up to the original game's legacy. And then I'll finally close off with giving the Sane Trilogy a final rating as a whole collection. So with all that said, let's get on with the review and see if Vicarious Visions were able to live up to the greatness of the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy, starting with Crash Bandicoot 1. Now right off the bat, the graphics in this game look gobsmackingly beautiful. The character animations look so animated and cartoony, and I absolutely love it. I also love how in the opening when we see Tana get captured, we actually see her put up a fight against Cortex's minions right before she gets taken away. It was a very nice touch and made her feel more, for lack of a better word, humanized, and the situation more dire to rescue her. We are then introduced to the beginning of the game on Insanity Beach, and my word, the level looks absolutely stunning. And it's pretty much how I imagine the level to look with modern day graphics. The world map also looks great, and it totally got me immersed into the game, so we're definitely off to a good start. So we start the game and are able to get a feel for how Crash controls, and well, Crash's controls feel pretty good. He does feel a bit weighted, and this is especially apparent when you're performing jumps as you feel a sense of heaviness when landing on surfaces. It can feel a bit awkward at first, especially in the bridge and temple stages, as these are the stages where you do the most jumping on a 3D plane. However, once you get used to the heavier controls, it's really not that bad at all. Speaking of which, all the levels in this game look bloody amazing, and like I mentioned earlier, they all translated beautifully with the next gen modern day graphics, and I love how they kept the cartoony undertones that Naughty Dog had in the original games. From the vibrant tropical beach and jungle stages, to the earthy cavernous ruined levels, and the dark and gloomy outer castle stages, just to name a few. Playing through this game was a completely artistic orgasm, seeing all the levels remade from the ground up, and living up to the originals with a fresh, next-gen coat of paint. Not only that, but I also love the added in detail in the bonus room stage, where when you reach the end of the stage, you see Tana who is excited to see that you made it to the end, only to be swept up by Cortex. That was such a great new added in detail that wasn't featured in the original game. So I definitely give Vicarious Visions some extra props for adding in that little detail. Now I'm going to admit that I've only played through the first game once, and I am by no means an expert at this game, but after replaying the first game, I definitely have to admit that I had some rage-inducing moments. The first level that really irked me was Hog Wild. The level starts out fine, but towards the end where you're jumping over the rotating pigs, I always kept dying on the last one. I'm not sure if there was some bug or something, but yeah, I died there quite a few times, and I've heard that others had the same problem in that particular area. I mean, I was still able to complete the level, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't getting a bit frustrated at it. Now the road to nowhere and the high road were the spawn of Satan for me, and the very bane of my gaming existence. They were just as hard as I remembered them to be. I died so many times in these levels, and I just felt like strangling myself with the PlayStation controller. Joking of course, but seriously, these levels were not a good time for me the first time around. I ended up using the rope run, well for me, the rope walk glitch. And while some may say that's cheating, I found out the rope glitch could be just as hard because you have to remain balanced, otherwise you'll slip and fall to your death. And oh my god, freaking slippery climb. This level was just as challenging as ever. The level is still probably one of the most challenging levels I've ever played in a video game. You really need to have precise jumping, and it's so easy to make a mistake and fall to your death if you're not focused, and needless to say, this level totally took me for one wild ride. Now, I'm in no way saying that this game is unfair, because it really isn't. The game really isn't that hard at its core. Yeah, some of the levels can be quite a challenge, but it's the good kind of challenge. And you can't help but feel a big sense of accomplishment when you finally make it to the end of the level. And I've gotta say, replaying this game totally brought back those feelings for me. Speaking of which, let's talk about the music. I will say that there's no denying that all the remade songs are very nicely done. Josh Mansell, the composer who did all the music for the original trilogy, returned and remade all the songs for the remake, and he did a very great job. I even found myself liking some of the remade songs a tad more than the original tracks, like the remade themes for Insanity Beach, Toxic Waste, and the boss theme for Dr. Embryo. However, I must admit that some of the remade music tracks slightly fail in terms of tone when compared to the originals. Part of the first game's charm of what made it so memorable were the unsettling tones of some of the levels. As you progress through the game, the levels got more difficult, and some may even say intense, and the music helped emphasize the intimidation factor. And well, some of the remade songs just lost that. One example of this is the theme for the generator room. The original song sounded eerie and unsettling, with the metallic clanging, the sound of the erratic computers, and the overall creepy joining ambience that just sent shivers down your spine and made you feel nervous as you progressed through this creepy power plant, not knowing what to expect the first time you played through this level. In the remake, however, that creepy feeling is lost, as the remake sounds more lighthearted and even bouncy, which totally eliminated the eerie and unsettling feeling that the original song was built around. Another level that was affected by this was Slippery Climb. The original song sounded foreboding and unsettling, with how it started out low and gradually got more creepy and sporadic, which only emphasized the uneasiness of this level. In the remake, however, that feeling of uneasiness is totally lost, as the remake sounds more upbeat and cartoony with the heavy use of the jazzy-styled pipe organ. Don't get me wrong, the song still sounds dark, and it does fit the more cartoonish tone of the remake, but it's just not as creepy or eerie like the original. But despite my criticism on a few of the remade songs, the soundtrack as a whole for this game sounded great, and it just showed that Josh Mansell has not lost his musical touch at all. But yeah, I do need to mention the loading screens. While they're not the longest compared to some other games out there, compared to the original trilogy, they're much longer, and to be honest, that was pretty disappointing. But what's worse is how bland and boring it is to look at. I mean heck, as bad as Battle Cortex's loading screens were, even they looked more visually appealing. But to be fair, it's not a total detractor from this game, because as I mentioned before, the levels look stunning. So finally we come to the boss battles, and they all play just like they did in the original games, with the exception of Papu Papu taking a few more extra hits. Like in the original game, they all follow a simple pattern and go down pretty easily. Though I will say that again, the graphics look beautiful, and the characters were brimming with so much personality and charisma. Man, the attention to detail was just spot on. Putting aside my criticism on some of the remade music, this remake was pretty well done, and I had a very enjoyable time playing through Crash Bandicoot 1 again. That all said, Crash Bandicoot 1 gets 8 out of 10. In my opinion, the remake for the first game is definitely on par with the original game released back in 1996. Though to be honest, I can't say that I'm too surprised, as it was pretty obvious that the first game in the trilogy was going to benefit the most from an upgrade. And with that all said, I'm happy to say that Crash Bandicoot 1 is still a great game to experience. So with the first game done, let's crash right on into Crash Bandicoot 2, Cortex Strikes Back. The original Crash Bandicoot 2 was a great sequel, and I had a lot of fun playing the game way back in the day. And I'm happy to say that like the original game, the opening cinematic was just as dark and foreboding as the original, with the dark and unsettling atmosphere. The intimidating tone is still intact, and the character animations once again look very cartoony and full of personality. it made me wish that the cutscenes were a little longer if I had to be honest. Seriously, the animation and the overall presentation are once again on freaking point. Like I mentioned before, the overall graphics of this game look gorgeous, and a lot of the levels translated beautifully with the next gen style. I love all the little details they included in the levels, from the reflective ice and stalagmites in the snow themed levels, to the rain in the jungle stages, and the texturing of the fire in the ancient rune stages. Vicarious Visions did a great job of polishing the levels and paying a nice homage to the original game. Like I mentioned earlier, the newest edition of the remake was that you had the option to play as Crash's little sister, Crash Bandicoot, and you're able to play as her in all the games. While the change is only cosmetic as she plays the same as Crash, I was still very happy they allowed her to be playable, because instead of having Coco sitting around waiting for Crash, she's now able to finally get on into action herself. Yeah, girl power. But what I loved even more is that they gave an explanation on how she was able to time travel, as you learn that she's using the time twister machine from Warped to travel back to the first game. Man, I just freaking love little details like this. And I'm just gonna say, Coco is freaking adorable. Nuff said. So we're back to the game and I already have something to complain about. While the visuals of the game do look very nice, the room projector interlude scenes looked awful. In the original game, the room would get all dark, and when Dr. Cortex, Coco, or Dr. Embryo came on screen, they would be glitching in and out due to the interference, and it really immersed you into the situation. But here, that's completely gone, and I'm sorry to say, but that was really disappointing. And while I'm on it, the warp rooms look so bland and boring. I didn't really take notice of this until I reached the water themed room, and well, just look at it. The only room that looked nice in my opinion was the ice themed room. But other than that, they just felt so lackluster compared to the original game. Yes, I know that it's a minor thing that doesn't affect the game as a whole, and it really doesn't matter in the long run, but it matters to me. And it's just a shame because the attention to detail in all the other areas was done so well. But the details here just feel so cheap, and they really could have been done a lot better. But all that aside, the gameplay plays and feels just like how I remember it. Crash does feel a little bit heavier compared to the original game, but I honestly didn't mind that at all, and I got used to it pretty quickly. However, some of the enemy hitboxes are a bit off, and you'll have to be a lot more precise when attacking or jumping on certain enemies. Seriously, I died so many times and spaced out, but in saying that, this isn't game breaking by any means. You just gotta be more mindful of what you're doing. Now the polar riding just felt way off. I'm not sure why, but Polar System movement felt way heavier and not as fluid like he was in the original game. And what's even worse is how sluggish he feels when moving it from left to right. It just wasn't comfortable, and keep this in mind guys, I played the original games right before I played the remake, and this is just something I took major notice to. And I'm sorry, but I was not a fan of this change at all. However, that aside, the jetpack levels looked freaking gorgeous, and while the controls felt a bit awkward at first glance, once I got used to them, I had a blast playing through these levels again. The music for the most part sounds good and fits the more cartoony nature of this game, but I found that a lot of the songs felt pretty weak compared to the original soundtrack. Don't get me wrong, the music is still great, and I especially love the remade themes for Hang 8 and the Ancient Rune levels, but I just felt that the soundtrack as a whole felt way too soft compared to the original. The boss battles again play the same way as they did in the original game. Ripperoo was just as easy as before, the Komodo brothers were insultingly easier, as in the last two phases of their fight, while Joe is spinning, Mo doesn't throw a sword at you like he did in the original fight, which was pretty disappointing because the original fight was already easy to begin with. And to be honest, that was pretty disappointing. But whoa, Tiny Tiger. I've gotta say that Tiny looks amazing here. His touch-up design looks badass, and I really liked it. The battle was still pretty easy, but I really liked the attention to detail on the stage. Dr. Engine's boss battle was again the same as before, but man, his ship looked freaking awesome. And what's even better with this battle is that Crash uses his hands to throw the Wumpa Fruit, and I gotta say, it made the fight more challenging as he had to be more precise of where you were throwing. This was definitely a nice touch-up. And finally we have Dr. Cortex, and his battle was still easy as balls. So at the very least, the atmosphere was a lot more dynamic compared to the original fight because of the updated visual presentation. Honestly, I'm a bit mixed with this game. While I did appreciate all the little details from adding in Coco as a playable character and the upgraded visuals, there were just a few things I really couldn't get behind, like Polar's butchered controls, the slightly weaker soundtrack, and the lack of some key details. So for me, Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back gets 7 out of 10. Now don't get me wrong here, a 7 is still very good, and I am in no way saying that this game is bad. It just could have done a lot better when it came to the overall polish. But with that said and 2 out of the 3 games completed, it's time to warp right on in to Crash Bandicoot 3. Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, the first Crash game I ever owned as a kid, and a game I had so many fun memories with, even though I never beat it during my childhood. To be honest, other than the first game, Crash Bandicoot 3 was the game I was most excited to play in the Sane Trilogy. So we start the game and once again, the visuals are stunning, but the overall tone is a bit lacking. In the opening scene of the original game, it was very unnerving when we saw Cortex in a dark room cowering before a shadowy figure covered in darkness with a brooding voice. But that intimidation factor is totally lost here. And as much as I love the lively character animation and expressions, I have to admit that they went a bit too overboard with Uka Uka, whereas it comes across as more silly than menacing. And well, compared to the original scene, this was a bit of a letdown. But aside from that, the visuals and animation when we get to Crash's house pick right back up, and I was really loving it. I've gotta say that running through the Toad Village again with the updated visuals was such a euphoric feeling. And I felt like a kid again taking in the beautiful scenery, and this feeling extends for most of the other levels as well. The graphics look amazing, and the lighting is so on point. The levels playing remain completely faithful to the originals. The underwater levels are spot on. Coco's Pura levels, while a bit heavier than the original, was still very enjoyable when you got used to them. And the plane levels were just as engaging. Though when it came to the jet ski levels, the controls felt way off compared to the original. The turning felt very loose, and it made it more of a chore collecting the boxes. Don't get me wrong, these levels are still doable, but I'd be lying if I said that I enjoyed the new control physics, and I much prefer the tighter controls of the original. However, that being said, the jet ski levels were such a sight to behold, and they're definitely the best looking levels in the game. The motorcycle levels are pretty faithful to the originals, though one slight annoyance I had was when going off ramps. The camera would just abruptly center position itself as you reached the height of the jump, and it was pretty annoying if I had to be honest. That being said, however, again, the levels look fantastic. And then we have the futuristic levels, which at first look pretty good, but when I got to the middle of the level, it really feels pretty underwhelming. In the original game, the level was filled to the brim with lights everywhere, enhancing the futuristic tone of the level. But here, the level just looks bland. Very shiny and polished, yes, but flat, murky, and not as visually stimulating compared to the original level. Yeah, I know that these things are not game breaking, but it's just a shame that they didn't put more resources into these levels, because all the other levels looked great, and it was just a shame that these levels didn't get the same amount of detail put into them. The boss battles were pretty much the same as before. Tiny's battle was engaging and simple, but I will say that I love the little detail where after you beat him, the crowd in the stadium will begin booing and hurling tomatoes at him. I couldn't help but feel kinda bad for the big guy, but I really love that they added in this little detail as it really immersed me into the setting. I also loved how expressive Tiny was in the dialogue interludes, where he zooms his head in and out as he's talking to you. And this goes for all the bosses. Dingodile was pretty similar as well, though I noticed that they took out his last 2 battle sequences that made this fight even easier. And well, that was disappointing. But what's even worse is when after you beat him, he doesn't say his signature line. I mean, come on, really? Yeah, this battle was not all that good compared to the original. Dr. Entropy's battle was good, but unfortunately, he himself felt pretty underwhelming what with his stiff intro, and I found the voice acting for him to be pretty bland compared to the original. Overall, I have mixed feelings with this battle. But man, did things pick up with Dr. Engine's boss battle. Which sure, the controls for Coco's ship feel a bit different compared to the tighter controls of the original. It was still pretty fun, and the fight was just as engaging as ever, and the visuals were stunning the shit out of me. And finally, we're at Dr. Cortex, and while this fight plays just like how it did in the original game, I have to say that the fight here felt pretty underwhelming, to be honest. I don't know, the lack of the special effects made this fight feel mundane and bland compared to the special effects used in the original that made this fight feel more dangerous. I just felt like I was going through the motions with this fight. Though I will say that the song remake sounded just as good as the original. The boss fight remakes as a whole were fine, I guess, though I definitely felt that some of them were lacking when compared to the originals, in my opinion. Speaking of which, the music in this game was great, and honestly, I feel it's on par and even a little bit better than the original if I had to be honest. Really, the only song that I actually preferred the original over was the theme for the prehistoric levels, but even saying that, the remake sounds very nice. I'm not gonna lie, the original soundtrack will always have a special place with me, but the remake soundtrack here is just as good, and was a great tribute to the original soundtrack. And finally, we're nearing the end stage of completion, which is the overall replay value, and thankfully, it has remained intact. Yes, like the original game, you're able to collect all the box gems and race through the levels to earn time relics, and you're able to do this across all 3 games. Outside of Warped, the time relics are not required for 100% completion, but it's there for those who think they've got what it takes to get the best time and earn a platinum relic. You're able to use the speed shoes in Crash 2, but in the first game, it's either go big or go home, and you'll really have to bring your A game if you want to earn a good score. It can be a bit frustrating, but it's great for a post-game challenge. My score for this game is on a teeter-totter scale, as while there were things I really enjoyed, like the updated graphics and visuals, the great soundtrack, and how they stayed faithful to the original game, there were some things that felt pretty underwhelming, like some of the lackluster boss battles, and the lack of detail and polish in a few of the levels. But in the end, I finally came to a conclusion. Crash Bandicoot Warped gets 7 out of 10. What more do you want? It's Crash Bandicoot Warped, and it's just as good as it ever was in my opinion. And playing through this game again with the updated visuals was an enjoyable experience. So after looking at all 3 games, how did the Sane Trilogy as a whole stack up next to the originals? Well, despite a few minor issues here and there, the overall experience was as good as it ever was. And it was a total delight to walk down memory lane in the shoes of our beloved orange marsupial. So, with that all said, the Crash Bandicoot Sane Trilogy gets 8 out of 10. While I know that I'll be returning back to the original Naughty Dog trilogy in the future, I can happily say that I'll also be doing the same for the Sane Trilogy. And in my opinion, these games are on par with their originals. And well, all I have left to say is thank you to Vicarious Visions for doing such a good job on bringing these classic games back to life. You all did a wonderful job giving us a genuine and faithful remake for all of us to enjoy for many years to come. And to be completely honest, after seeing how well Vicarious Visions handled the Sane Trilogy, I would be more than happy to see them do a remake for the Spout of Dragon trilogy. Because as far as I'm concerned, Vicarious Visions show just how far they've come as a game developer, and I'm more than confident that they'll do a great job bringing back our lovable purple dragon. So while they're working on that, I'll be sitting by on the side waiting with excitement. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more gaming goodness. I'm Decadent Gamer, and you have yourselves a great day. Thanks for watching.